Nathan Osborne parked his car in the driveway of his modern Seattle home at exactly 47 minutes past 4 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, almost 2 hours earlier than his usual arrival time. He had fled from his downtown office without saying a single word to anyone, loosening his silk tie somewhere along the busy interstate highway with the sole purpose of driving home, sitting on his living room sofa, closing his tired eyes, and thinking of absolutely nothing until the following morning. The towering glass facades of Seattle's booming corporate district were miles behind him, yet the suffocating pressure of his immense responsibilities still weighed upon his broad shoulders like solid lead. His sprawling house, a gorgeous modern villa perched on a steep hillside overlooking the deep blue waters of the Puget Sound, often felt from the outside like a beautiful golden cage. It was a place that perfectly radiated architectural perfection, but for the past 2 agonizing years, it had completely lost the genuine warmth of a true family home. However, the precise moment he pushed open the heavy mahogany front door, his desperate plan for absolute, undisturbed silence died instantly in the foyer. A gentle wave of music drifted gracefully from the sunken living room, catching him completely off guard as he stood frozen on the welcome mat. It was clearly not the large television, nor was it the tinny, compressed sound of a smartphone speaker placed on a coffee table. It was undeniably live music, echoing with an organic resonance that could only come from physical instruments. The voice of a woman, deep, steady, and utterly unhurried, sang a hauntingly beautiful melody that he had never heard anywhere before. It was tuned so incredibly soft and soothing that it almost felt like a comforting whisper actively wrapping itself around the empty spaces of the large room. Beneath that rich and soulful voice lay the unmistakable, resonant sound of a small acoustic guitar, which was being plucked with remarkably careful, deliberate, and searching fingers. Alongside the acoustic guitar was the rhythmic, incredibly soft beating of wooden bongos, marking the steady tempo like a secondary heartbeat pulsating within the very walls of the house. Nathan soundlessly lowered his heavy leather briefcase onto the polished hardwood floor, took 3 exceptionally quiet steps down the long corridor, and firmly planted himself at the threshold of the living room, leaning his weary shoulder against the painted wall. What he witnessed at that room caused his racing heart to completely skip a beat and his breath to catch painfully in his tight throat. Rachel, the quiet woman he had formerly hired exactly 3 months ago to maintain the cleanliness of the house and prepare simple evening meals, was kneeling elegantly in the exact center of the vast room. She leaned slightly toward a small, inexpensive microphone stand, her voice entirely controlled and overflowing, with a maternal warmth that sounded less like a rehearsed performance and much more like an act of profound care. To her left, little Ethan sat cross-legged on the thick woolen rug, holding a small red guitar securely on his tiny lap. His dainty fingers were pressing down on the tough steel strings with a fierce burning intensity that truly did not seem to belong on the soft face of a 6-year-old child. He was entirely consumed by the music, a living portrait of absolute dedication that completely ignored the outside world. To her right sat Lucas, his small palms resting flat against the leather heads of a pair of wooden bongos, tapping out a steady rhythm without tearing his wide eyes away from Rachel for even a fraction of a second. Nathan did not move a single muscle, scarcely daring to draw a breath, as he stood there just observing the magical scene unfolding before him, terrified that the slightest noise might shatter the fragile beauty of the moment. Something ancient and incredibly powerful, an emotion that he had not genuinely felt for 2 full, agonizing years, began to rise forcefully within his tight chest as he watched his children. The absolute last time Nathan had seen this exact expression of deep, genuine, undisturbed concentration on the faces of his beloved sons was before the devastating car accident. It was from a time before everything in their lives shattered into a million unfixable pieces. Before his wonderful wife, Caroline, was suddenly taken away from them. Her tragic passing happened in a completely senseless manner that absolutely no amount of corporate wealth, extensive resources, or meticulous life planning could have ever possibly prevented from occurring. That terrible day was exactly 2 years ago, And throughout those long, miserable 24 months, both Ethan and Lucas had slowly but steadily closed themselves off from the outside world. They had become like two small wooden doors that quietly shut just a fraction of an inch more with every passing sunset. Their dedicated child therapist, Mrs. Foster, had issued a stern and explicit warning about this exact emotional retreat just 6 months ago during a private consultation at her downtown clinic. She had called him into her cozy, brightly lit office and told him in no uncertain terms that the growing boys were exhibiting severe signs of emotional withdrawal. She explained that they were not processing the immense loss of their gentle mother in anything resembling a healthy or sustainable manner, and that they desperately needed a stable emotional anchor. Mrs. Foster had firmly emphasized that they required a constant, unwavering emotional connection at home, not merely predictable routines, hired help, and rigid daily schedules designed to keep them busy. They needed someone who was truly, entirely present with them in the moment, someone who would sit down and actively listen to their unspoken grief. She astutely pointed out that Nathan's grueling 60-hour work weeks were actively creating a massive emotional distance that grew wider every single day without anyone consciously noticing the resulting damage. Nathan had listened intently to the wise therapist. He had agreed wholeheartedly with her professional assessment. He had promised that he would radically change his habits, and he had been absolutely sincere when he walked out of her busy clinic. But then came an ordinary Monday morning, bringing an urgent telephone call from a restless venture capital investor who simply could not be asked to wait for a resolution. Then came Tuesday, delivering an unexpected public relations crisis that strictly required his personal signature and immediate, undivided attention to properly resolve before the evening news cycle. Wednesday arrived carrying the exact type of lucrative corporate merger that had the potential to definitively define the financial trajectory of his entire company for the next 5 years. And so, the earnest promise he had made to himself to come home much earlier, to sit on the carpet with his young boys, and to be completely present without any digital distractions was continually pushed back to the next week, then the next fortnight, and ultimately to the following month. Meanwhile, the two little boys grew quieter and increasingly distant, pulling further and further into their own isolated minds, until they became little more than two small, silent bodies occupying a massive house. They lived alongside a grieving father who loved them more than life itself, but who was tragically almost never physically or emotionally available to definitively prove that immense love to them. And now, standing silently in the shadow of the hallway, watching Rachel sing while his sons played wooden instruments he did not even know they were capable of holding, Nathan felt the crushing weight of that terrible distance crash down upon him all at once. The morning strategy meeting had lasted for nearly 4 tedious hours, culminating in a massive partnership deal that would successfully expand the tech company into 2 entirely new states. Nathan had walked out of that sleek, glass-walled conference room, genuinely feeling that every stressful minute of his grueling day had been entirely worth the massive effort. Yet now, standing just 3 feet away from his flesh and blood, watching a woman he barely knew provide his children with something he had utterly failed to give them, that shallow feeling of corporate triumph completely vanished into thin air. That hollow business victory was rapidly replaced by an overwhelming emotion that possessed no corporate title, occupied no tidy column in a financial spreadsheet, and filled no neat line in a meeting protocol. It was a profound, aching realization of the massive emotional debt he owed to 2 6-year-old boys who had silently, and without a single word of complaint, learned to completely stop waiting for their perpetually busy father to walk through the front door. Rachel's voice dipped considerably lower, slowing the tempo of the melody and deliberately creating an open, welcoming space within the music, a pregnant pause where she stepped back and patiently waited. Ethan naturally filled that quiet void with a hesitant strummed chord, and Lucas immediately followed up by filling it with a resonant, echoing tap against the leather drumhead. She seamlessly adapted her soothing voice to match exactly what the young boys were giving her, weaving her beautiful sound directly into theirs without ever attempting to seize control of the delicate performance. Nathan felt his dry throat tighten painfully as he fully comprehended the absolute brilliance of what this humble woman was actively doing for his vulnerable children. She was allowing them to safely take the lead, giving them a voice and a sense of agency. And absolutely no one had done that for these fragile boys in a very long time. "Close your eyes and just feel the vibration," Rachel instructed softly, shifting her gentle gaze directly toward Lucas, whose tiny shoulders were stiff and hiked up almost all the way to his ears. "It absolutely does not have to be mathematically right, and it certainly does not have to be perfectly flawless. It only needs to be truly felt inside your chest. Do you understand the important difference, Lucas?" Slowly but surely, the severe tension drained from the boy's small shoulders, and the previously rigid rhythm of the wooden bongos shifted dramatically. The beating became significantly lighter, remarkably firmer, and wonderfully natural, as if a tightly coiled spring hidden deep inside the grieving child had finally been released from its immense pressure. Rachel offered a quiet, understated smile. It was not a massive, triumphant grin seeking endless praise, but rather one of those deeply silent, knowing smiles that naturally appear when you witness a profound emotional release in another human being. Across the room, Ethan casually glanced toward the shadowed hallway and suddenly noticed his towering father standing perfectly still by the wooden entryway. The two of them locked eyes in total silence for a long, stretching moment, while the acoustic music continued to play softly in the background. Nathan fully expected his son to abruptly stop playing his instrument, to shout out in total surprise, or to quickly announce to Rachel that his absent father had finally returned from the city. But Ethan merely offered him a brief, fleeting little smile, and immediately redirected his undivided attention back toward the steel strings of his red guitar. That subtle, understated smile struck Nathan significantly harder than any shouted words of resentment ever could have, because there was absolutely nothing hiding behind it except a quiet, self-contained satisfaction. And that specific satisfaction had absolutely nothing to do with whether his absent father was standing there in the hallway or working late in a distant office building. It existed entirely for its own sake, a moment of joy built independently. And somehow that raw honesty, the pure, unfiltered honesty of a 6-year-old child, cut much deeper than anything an articulate adult could have ever possibly said. Lucas, on the other hand, remained entirely unaware of his father's unexpected presence for quite some time, as he was far too deeply immersed in the rhythmic world he was actively creating with his own 2 hands. The boy's eyes remained half-closed, his little hands moving firmly, his small body swaying gently back and forth with a level of undeniable confidence in movement that did not seem to suit a young child who had only been practicing this specific skill for a few short weeks. Nathan watched his youngest son with a complex, swirling mixture of profound paternal pride and a very specific, aching variety of sorrow. It was the distinct, piercing sorrow that invariably arrives when you suddenly realize that someone you love deeply has grown up in a beautiful way, and you were simply not there to witness the miraculous transformation happen. Nathan leaned his heavy leather briefcase soundlessly against the painted hallway wall, deciding that abruptly entering the room with his usual commanding presence felt entirely wrong and deeply intrusive. It genuinely felt as though by stepping onto that woolen rug, he would clumsily shatter something incredibly fragile that had finally become whole again for the very first time in 2 agonizing years. Rachel made a brief, intentional pause in the flowing music, not to halt the session entirely, but rather to gently readjust the delicate harmony, and she turned her kind face toward Ethan. "You slightly missed the transition chord on the 4th downbeat," she pointed out with an encouraging tone, keeping her hands resting gently on her own lap. Ethan deeply furrowed his small brow, looking down at his fingers with a look of intense, unwavering concentration as he studied the wooden instrument. "I really thought I had managed to hit it perfectly that time," the little boy murmured, his voice tinged with a mild, youthful frustration as he analyzed his finger placement on the smooth wooden fretboard. "You were incredibly close," Rachel reassured him warmly. "But being merely close is a very different feeling than truly hitting it squarely. Would you like to give that specific section another try right now?" Ethan did not reply with spoken words. Instead, he repositioned his tiny fingers upon the steel strings with a fierce, burning determination that Nathan instantly recognized as a pure reflection of himself. It was the exact same stubborn, unyielding willpower that Nathan always felt burning in his own chest whenever a massive corporate deal was not yet finalized and he outright refused to walk away from the heavy negotiation table. Seeing this familiar, relentless trait clearly manifested in his young son, this incredibly productive refusal to simply accept a mediocre outcome caused a genuine smile to break across Nathan's exhausted face. For the very first time since he had walked through the front door, Ethan played the challenging musical section completely from the beginning once again, and this time around, his small fingers landed absolutely perfectly on the tricky strings. Lucas delivered a resounding celebratory smack onto the tight leather of his bongo drum in clear acknowledgement without ever breaking his steady tempo, and Rachel nodded her head in deep, silent approval. The acoustic music continued to flow gracefully through the house for another 15 minutes, and Nathan did not move from his hidden spot in the hallway for a single second of it. The magical performance eventually concluded in a completely natural, unforced manner, as if the song itself had simply decided it was finally time to go to sleep. Rachel took a step back from the inexpensive microphone stand, smoothing down her simple cotton apron, and looked directly at the two exhausted boys with an expression of quiet, profound honesty. "Both of you were absolutely incredible this afternoon. I mean that from the very bottom of my heart," she told them softly, her voice carrying an undeniable ring of truth that resonated deeply within the silent room. Lucas threw both of his small arms joyfully into the air and let out a victorious, uninhibited cheer that was so incredibly loud it echoed wildly off the high-vaulted ceilings of the luxurious living space. Ethan, meanwhile, remained seated perfectly still, gently brushing his tiny thumb back and forth across the quiet strings of his acoustic guitar, wearing a tremendously proud smile that he made absolutely no effort to hide from anyone. Rachel let out a warm, unguarded laugh that echoed beautifully through the spacious room, and it was absolutely not the polite, manufactured chuckle of an employee attempting to maintain strict professional boundaries. It was the completely genuine, unfiltered laughter of a caring human being who is entirely present in the current moment, entirely disconnected from any outside worries or future obligations. It was the sheer, magnetic warmth of that specific laugh that ultimately compelled Nathan to finally step out of the shadows and walk directly into the center of the brightly lit living room. The hard leather sole of his expensive dress shoe clicked sharply against the polished oak floorboards, and Rachel immediately snapped her head up, her previously relaxed facial expression shifting in an instant. Her demeanor did not change out of sheer terror, but rather shifted into a state of quiet, polite apprehension as she quickly straightened her slightly wrinkled apron and folded her hands neatly in front of her. "Good afternoon, Mr. Osborne. I truly had no idea that you would be arriving home from the city so early today," she stated respectfully, her voice returning to its usual measured professional tone. Nathan gently raised his hand in a deeply reassuring gesture, wanting to dispel any anxiety she might be feeling about his sudden appearance in the middle of the afternoon. "Please, it is perfectly fine. I actually heard the beautiful music from outside the house and decided to stand in the hallway and listen for quite a while," he explained in a soft, non-threatening voice. Before Rachel could formulate a proper professional response, little Ethan scrambled to his feet, holding the red guitar high in the air with one hand, and sprinted enthusiastically over to his towering father. "Daddy, were you watching me play the music just now?" Ethan asked, his bright eyes wide with a desperate, unspoken hunger for genuine parental validation. Nathan slowly crouched down until he was exactly at his son's eye level, looked deeply into the boy's hopeful face from mere inches away, and spoke with profound sincerity. "I saw every single second of it, buddy, and you played wonderfully. Please tell me, where on earth did you learn how to do all of that beautiful playing?" Ethan pointed a finger directly toward Rachel without a single second of hesitation, his innocent face beaming with absolute pride and adoration for his gentle, patient teacher. "She sits down and teaches it to me every single day when you are not here with us," he stated, with the absolute, unquestioning naturalness of a young child simply reporting an objective fact. He spoke completely, without any underlying malice, without any hidden agenda, intending only to honestly answer the question his curious father had just asked him. However, Nathan felt those innocent, casually delivered words strike like a heavy physical blow against a deeply vulnerable place hidden within his own soul. Because the simple phrase, "when you are not here," spoken with such chilling calmness and total acceptance, was vastly more effective than any fiery accusation a furious adult could have ever carefully constructed against him. Nathan slowly stood back up and walked deliberately over to Lucas, who had finally registered his father's presence and was currently observing him with a guarded, highly analytical expression. It was the deeply cautious look of a wounded child who had meticulously learned to weigh all his options before daring to approach someone who might suddenly disappear again. Nathan crouched down slowly beside his youngest son, carefully examined the wooden bongos sitting on the rug, gently ran his hand over the worn leather surface with genuine curiosity, and softly asked, "Please, teach me exactly how you do this." Lucas studied his father for several long seconds with a degree of seriousness that seemed far too mature for a 6-year-old child, weighing the sincerity of the unprecedented request. "You never wanted to learn how to do this stuff before today," the little boy pointed out matter-of-factly, his small voice carrying a heavy, undeniable truth that echoed loudly in the quiet room. Nathan did not attempt to back away from the uncomfortable truth. He did not seek out any flimsy corporate excuses. He simply remained firmly planted exactly where he was and softly admitted, "I know that is true, but I really want to learn it right now." Lucas finally reached out, took his father's large hand in his own tiny fingers, placed it completely flat in the center of the leather drum, and instructed, "Keep an open palm. Do not hit it with closed fingers, because if you close them, the noise sounds ugly." Nathan obediently followed the child's strict instructions and firmly struck the top of the drum, but the resulting sound emerged entirely wrong, coming out as a dull, lifeless thud. Lucas wrinkled his little nose in obvious disapproval and quickly demonstrated the proper relaxed technique with his own tiny hand, striking a perfectly resonant note before nodding for his father to try again. Nathan attempted the strike a second time, consciously relaxing his tense muscles, and this time the resulting sound was significantly better, echoing warmly through the large room. "You are getting closer to it," Lucas commented dryly, speaking with the exact tone of a highly demanding professor evaluating a student who was struggling to meet rigorous academic standards. Nathan deliberately paused his movements, keenly aware that this unexpected, profound seriousness from his youngest son was incredibly precious and fragile. His child was actively teaching him a lesson, opening a tiny window into his guarded heart, and Nathan silently vowed that he would absolutely not interrupt or rush this sacred process for anything else in the entire world. They remained inside that cozy living room for nearly a full hour, as the afternoon faded into a deep evening, actively building bridges over emotional chasms that had existed for years. Nathan humbly learned the fundamental basics of playing the bongos from Lucas, who taught his father with a strict, unwavering rigor that simply demanded quiet admiration and immense respect. Ethan enthusiastically played through all the various chords he had successfully memorized, frequently pausing to politely ask Rachel to correct his finger placement whenever a specific acoustic note sounded slightly off-key. When the two exhausted boys eventually fell fast asleep right there on the soft carpet, Nathan walked over to the large bay window and stood silently, gazing out into the dark, rain-swept Seattle garden. He turned around slowly to find Rachel sitting peacefully on the floor, the two sleeping boys anchoring her in place, her face carrying an expression that perfectly blended deep care, physical exhaustion, and a quiet, profound satisfaction. He approached the sleeping group carefully, keeping his voice to a soft whisper so as not to disturb the peaceful atmosphere, and gently suggested that she leave them there and go get some much-needed rest. Rachel managed to carefully extract herself and stand up without waking either of the slumbering children, smoothing down her cotton apron as she turned to walk toward the wooden door. Nathan quickly called out to her. Before she could cross the threshold, his voice filled with an urgent need for understanding, asking exactly how long the children had been acting this comfortably around her. Rachel paused thoughtfully, not as someone who lacked an answer, but as someone burdened with too many truths, trying to organize them into coherent sentences, before quietly revealing that she had bought the instruments with her own money. She explained that she had an estranged nephew who had completely shut down after a terrible family tragedy, and that simply sitting quietly beside him with a musical instrument was the only thing that had eventually brought him back to life. Nathan was completely floored by her quiet sacrifice, instantly offering to double her weekly salary right on the spot. But she politely declined, explaining firmly that she had absolutely not done it for the financial reward. Looking directly into her eyes, Nathan firmly insisted on expanding her formal employment contract anyway, officially transitioning her daily duties from basic household cleaning to actively nurturing his children's emotional well-being. Later that same week, Nathan's highly critical sister-in-law, Megan, arrived completely unannounced at the front door, sweeping into the house with her usual whirlwind of unsolicited opinions and sharp observations. When she marched into the living room and spotted the microphone, the acoustic guitar, and the wooden bongos, she immediately shot Nathan a look of severe skepticism, demanding to know who had brought such loud distractions into the grieving house. Nathan stood his ground with a calm, unwavering confidence that he had not possessed in years, softly informing her that the gentlewoman who worked there had provided the absolute best medicine his children had received in 2 years. Megan remained highly doubtful, crossing her arms tightly until she returned the following Thursday afternoon and personally witnessed the three of them playing music together in perfect, joyous harmony. That very evening, after Megan had left in stunned silence, Nathan finally walked over to the antique wooden piano sitting quietly in the dusty corner of the large room, an instrument that had firmly belonged to his late wife Caroline. He gently lifted the heavy wooden lid, exposing the pristine ivory keys for the absolute first time in 2 painful years, and sat down on the matching wooden bench, feeling the immense weight of his lingering grief slowly begin to lift. At work, his senior partner David caught him rushing out of the high-rise elevator at exactly 5 o'clock, and loudly questioned why he was suddenly abandoning a crucial multi-million-dollar corporate merger meeting. Nathan simply looked his bewildered colleague squarely in the eye and calmly stated that some crucial investments in life yield profound returns that absolutely cannot be measured in quarterly profit margins, before walking out of the glass building without another word. He was finally choosing his fragile family over his demanding career, choosing to be present for the quiet moments that truly mattered. A few weeks later, the local elementary school announced a community talent showcase where all the ambitious young students could bravely share the unique skills they had been developing throughout the academic year. When Nathan casually asked his 2 boys if they wanted to perform their music on the public stage, Lucas immediately shouted his enthusiastic agreement, while Ethan firmly insisted that they would only do it if Rachel agreed to come along. Rachel offered a warm, reassuring smile and promised that she would proudly be sitting right there in the front row, solidifying a beautiful new chapter for the entire recovering household. On the highly anticipated day of the school performance, the 2 young boys woke up incredibly early, without needing any prompting, rehearsing passionately in the spacious living room while Nathan proudly put on his best tailored suit. They packed the red guitar and the wooden bongos carefully into the trunk of the car, driving down the steep Seattle hills toward the busy elementary school with a palpable sense of nervous excitement filling the vehicle. Rachel sat quietly in the passenger seat, offering soft words of encouragement whenever Lucas started to fidget anxiously with his small hands as they navigated the heavy morning traffic. Upon arriving at the crowded school auditorium, they were warmly greeted backstage by Mr. Harrison, the school's enthusiastic music director, who kindly helped them set up the microphone and arrange the wooden bongos perfectly on the brightly lit stage. The friendly teacher offered a reassuring thumbs up to the nervous boys, reminding them that the supportive audience was completely filled with loving parents who just wanted to see them having a wonderful time up there. Ethan took a deep, steadying breath, gripping the smooth neck of his red guitar tightly as the heavy velvet curtains finally began to slowly pull apart to reveal the waiting crowd. When Ethan and Lucas stepped out under the hot spotlights, they began to play a beautiful original melody they had written entirely by themselves, playing with a profound calmness and absolute concentration that caused the entire noisy auditorium to fall completely silent. As the final acoustic note faded softly away into the rafters, the audience's applause erupted instantly, and Nathan stood up in the front row, his eyes shining with unshed tears as he clapped louder than anyone else in the massive room. Ethan desperately searched the cheering crowd until he locked eyes with his weeping father, offering him a massive, triumphant smile that radiated pure, unadulterated joy. On the long drive back to their hillside home, the two exhausted but thrilled boys chattered continuously in the back seat, talking over one another as they excitedly reviewed every single magical second of their successful stage performance. Rachel answered their endless barrage of questions with her usual calm patience, her voice carrying a deep, satisfying warmth that beautifully filled the enclosed space of the moving vehicle. Nathan drove the car in complete silence, simply absorbing every single precious word of their joyful conversation, feeling incredibly grateful for the miraculous transformation that had finally taken place under his roof. When they finally parked safely in the quiet driveway and the boys immediately unbuckled their seatbelts to race excitedly toward the front door, Nathan deliberately remained seated inside the dark car for a long moment. Rachel, whose door was already swung wide open, quickly noticed that her employer had not moved an inch, and she paused patiently, waiting for him to gather his overwhelming thoughts. Without turning his head to look at her, Nathan softly admitted that he genuinely could not remember the last time he had felt this incredibly alive and deeply connected to his own precious family. Rachel did not press him for further explanation, completely understanding the immense gravity of his quiet confession without needing any extra words to fill the comfortable silence stretching between them. Nathan finally turned his head, looked her directly in the eyes with absolute sincerity, and offered a simple, heavily weighted word of profound gratitude for everything she had done to save his drowning family. He then stepped out of the vehicle and walked toward the illuminated doorway, finally entering a house that truly felt like a warm, loving home for the very first time in 2 agonizing years. As Nathan watched his sons laughing freely in the hallway, he fully understood a profound truth about the difficult human journey that we all must eventually face. Sometimes we spend agonizing years building massive emotional walls, brick by heavy brick, firmly believing that these impenetrable barriers will completely protect us and the vulnerable people we cherish the most from experiencing any further pain. We mistakenly call this isolation success. We proudly call it financial security, and we desperately call it preparing for an uncertain future, while we unknowingly starve our own souls of the connection we desperately need. Yet life has a remarkably strange way of forcing us to realize that the human spirit absolutely cannot thrive on cold concrete or shiny gold alone, no matter how much wealth we manage to cleverly accumulate. True emotional healing almost never begins in the sterile places where vast amounts of money flow freely, but rather in those quiet, unassuming moments where time simply stands completely still, and we deliberately choose to be fully present. It is the simple, unconditional willingness to sit silently beside a wounded heart, demanding absolutely no immediate progress, offering no complex agenda, and providing nothing but pure, unadulterated presence. Ultimately, true wealth is not measured by the towering numbers in a bank account, but by the quiet ability to recognize the invisible wounds of those we love and having the incredible patience to wait for them to heal. Love is not a complicated language that requires a prestigious degree to master. It is simply a gentle, forgiving melody that absolutely anyone can understand, as long as they are finally willing to stop running and just genuinely listen.